When I think about radical self-compassion, I think of it as a practice. And I know I've said this before, but really I feel like I could say it 100 times a day, and not for you necessarily, for me just as easily. But I think it's a practice. It's a practice to move away from our habit of saying negative things about ourselves or thinking negative things about ourselves or being harsh with ourselves. It's moving ourselves out of that habit, but that habit is well developed for most of us. And in many ways, the most well-developed habit we have in many ways, sadly. And so for me, this entire year has been about practice. What are my practices? And let me tell you, if I'm having a challenging day, I can imagine myself having, 50 to 100 interventions a day where I'm, just continuing with that practice of reminding myself that I have value. And I also know that for me, shame can really take over. I mean, there's if you're really close to me, you'll know that I talk about the worm, and the worm to me is shame. And I developed that term, ages ago when I was telling a friend about my shame. And I said, yeah, I'm feeling I'm feeling lower than a worm's belly, which is kind of an old phrase here. I don't know if it goes beyond the US, but it's kind of an old phrase. So eventually over the years, I started to just shorten it entirely. And now I just say, yeah, the worm's back. And what that means to my friends is I'm feeling shame. And in that shame, I have forgotten what's wonderful about me. I've forgotten that I have value. I've forgotten that I'm a spiritual person in this world. I've forgotten that I have love in my life. It's like the shame takes over for a short time. Now, the good news is it doesn't take over for very long anymore. That particular thing used to go on for quite a few days, and it would be really, really hard to pull out of it. But that doesn't happen anymore for me. And I've come to the point where I don't actually expect her to ever go away. In fact, a friend of mine who's a therapist said the most wonderful thing to me one time. She said, Mary, I imagine when we're older ladies, we'll be in our 80s, and we'll be sitting on your porch and we'll be talking, and you'll say something like, yeah, last week the worm came back and it was kind of a bummer, but I got through it. And I noticed myself just go, oh, what a relief. I don't have to make her go away. I don't have to even shame myself for having shame, or I don't have to shame myself that she has visited me. There's nothing wrong. It merely means that for whatever happened in my life, I developed that. And so now when she comes, I will do the really hard thing, which is call a friend and say, yeah, the worm's back. And the thing I ask is, would you tell me a few things, a few needs of yours that are met by having me in your life? That's actually the exact request. Would you tell me a few needs of yours that are met by having me in your life? Which is really a hard question to ask when in shame. When the worm is up, it feels like an awful question. So I have to tell you, if you choose to try this, be really careful who you ask, because you don't want to ask anybody that question when you're feeling that vulnerable, who you don't have 100% trust they're going to tell you something positive. You need to have 100% trust, because it's a scary thing to do. So that's one kind of example of how I am where I'm in practice. My self-compassion is a practice that I do, like meditation, like yoga. And I no longer think, as I said before, that I'm going to have a day when suddenly I'm going to stop thinking negative thoughts about myself. I mean, I would actually love that. I mean, we could have a spiritual conversation about that. There might be a time, if you have similar spiritual beliefs as I do, there might be a time when I actually can live that. But as a human, I don't think it's possible. And I no longer need that. What I need is a practice to help me get through it when I'm being harsh on myself. That's what I need as a human. So, and I'm also reminding myself that there's no end game. When I was sort of new to NVC, it was so exciting to me, the possibilities that NVC brought into my life. the possibilities of living differently, having relationships different, being different in the world. And I would have these major ahas, and I would literally be thinking, wow, I think things are different now. And so in the beginning, I thought there was an end game. Wow, if I just work really hard and get better at this, then, whatever comes next. But then at some point I realized, actually, what's really remarkable about this is that even though I've been in it now for 20 years and I've done have a rich spiritual life, so I've done a bunch of work there and I've done a bunch of work in other ways, despite all of that, I'm still learning. And so I can revel in the learning. I can revel in the deepening. I can revel in the knowledge that I am way kinder to myself today than I was 30 years ago, or 20 or 10 or 5. Way kinder. I can even revel in the knowledge that where I started and where I am now is remarkable as a life path. And so I'm no longer looking for the end game.